"I'm not asking for money," Daniel said, his voice calm but unshakably firm. "I just need a job to feed my daughter." Silence followed, not the kind that settles softly, but the kind that slices through a fluorescent-lit lobby at the height of corporate indifference. Across the metal desk, the HR assistant blinked. Her hand hovered mid-click above the mouse. "That's noble," she said awkwardly, then shifted her eyes to the digital form on her screen. But the janitorial department usually doesn't take walk-ins. Daniel Carter stood tall despite his worn-out boots and threadbare coat. 43 years old, rail-thin from long shifts and short meals with silver peppering the edges of his beard, but it was his eyes that made people pause. Clear, sharp, steady. Eyes of a man who'd seen things fall apart and somehow stayed upright. "Then let me mop a floor while you decide," he said. "I'll leave if I don't earn it." That made her look up. Something in the way he said it, like he wasn't begging, just offering a trade, made her tap a different key. 10 minutes later, Daniel was holding a badge clipped to a green lanyard that read, "Temporary Access. Facilities." He didn't smile. He just whispered, "Thank you," and tucked the badge under his coat. The first thing Daniel did was run his fingers along the handle of the mop. He gripped it like he was checking a patient's pulse. Then he inspected the wheels of the cart, the weight of the cleaning solution, and the path lines in the mop head like a soldier checking his rifle. "You're overthinking it," said Manny, the head janitor. He was big, bald, and nursing a coffee like it was his last connection to sanity. Daniel gave a faint smile. "Old habits. Used to check IV drips the same way. You were medical once." Manny studied him for a beat. "Huh. Well, up there's a different kind of hospital. They bleed money, not people. Just don't mop in circles. It messes with their heads." Daniel nodded, adjusted the cart, and pushed out toward the elevators. No badge should have let him up this high, but a glitch in the system hadn't revoked access from a prior contractor. And Daniel knew quiet and invisible in a uniform slipped through the opened elevator doors like he belonged. He didn't mean to pause when he stepped off the elevator. He meant to mop and move on. But the silence of floor 42 wasn't like the others. It had a stillness that rang in the ears. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a city still waking up Seattle fog draped like gauze across steel and glass. Conference rooms lined one side, each one surgically minimalist. But it wasn't the architecture that made him stop. It was the girl. She was sitting alone near the far window, small as a secret legs folded underneath her arms, wrapped around a faded stuffed giraffe. She didn't look up when he rolled the mop cart across the marble. She didn't flinch when the wheels squeaked. Her gaze, or what appeared to be one, was fixed somewhere beyond the skyline. Daniel recognized the look instantly. Not blindness, disconnection. He had seen it in patients before. The ones who had pain too deep for sound movement or even recognition. But something strange happened. As Daniel adjusted the mop handle and turned toward the streak of morning sun slicing across the floor, the light bounced off the polished marble and struck her face at an angle, and her head moved. Not much, a twitch, a tilt barely perceptible. But enough. Her brows tightened ever so slightly. Daniel froze. No one reacts to light like that if they can't detect it. He turned away, heart suddenly picking up speed. Could have been coincidence. Could have been imagined. But he wasn't the type to see ghosts. Through a glass partition, Evelyn Stone stood watching. Tall, composed, and colder than the steel beams that held her empire together, she sipped her espresso without a sound. She'd seen janitors come and go. None of them paused. None of them noticed grace. But this one had. She watched as Daniel moved the mop with an almost reverent precision, never rushing, never wasting emotion. Like he wasn't cleaning a floor, but remembering something. She tapped a finger lightly on the tablet in her hand. Grace hadn't spoken in 3 years, hadn't laughed since she was 4. Diagnosed with congenital cortical blindness at birth, she was, as far as the medical world was concerned, a closed window. But just now, Evelyn saw it too. The way Grace's head turned. The way her eyes fluttered like they wanted to chase something. Daniel finished the hallway and began packing his gear. Grace hadn't moved again, but she also hadn't retreated, hadn't turned away. He paused, slowly pulled out a cleaning rag and ran it along the glass just beside her. The light shifted once more. Her fingers tightened around the giraffe. That was no accident. But before Daniel could process it, a voice rang out behind him, sharp-clipped and utterly unimpressed. "You don't belong on this floor." He turned. Evelyn Stone stood with one eyebrow raised and both arms crossed like she was about to call security. Daniel nodded. "Probably not. Got sent up here by mistake." "Was just finishing." "You saw her, didn't you?" Evelyn asked bluntly. He didn't lie. "Yes, she didn't react to you. She reacted to the light," he said gently. "Not to me." A pause. Heavy. Loaded. Evelyn narrowed her eyes, voice dropping low. "She's blind. Then maybe I imagined it." Daniel picked up the mop bucket handle. "But maybe someone should try imagining something else for a change." He pushed the cart past her without waiting for a response. Behind him, the little girl in the window whispered one word too soft to reach her mother. "Yellow." But Daniel heard it. And he didn't look back because if he did, he wouldn't be able to hide the tears rising behind his own eyes. They told him the rules on his second day. No eye contact, no questions, no direct interaction with the protected resident. The HR officer didn't even mention her name. Just the protected resident. Like she was a classified file, not a child. Daniel signed the NDA anyway, pen pressed firm against the paper. He didn't come here to break rules. But some things needed to be seen before they could be ignored. The light in the executive floor changed every hour. Massive motorized blinds adjusted with the sun casting new patterns across the marble. Daniel noticed that Grace always sat in the same corner of the glass room, her arms around her faded giraffe, her head tilted ever so slightly as if listening to a symphony no one else could hear. He also noticed something else. When the light moved, she moved. Not dramatically, not like a child chasing shadows, but a slight lean, a breath of hesitation. Like her body knew something her mind hadn't dared name. "Why are the chairs aligned like that?" Daniel asked Manny as they cleaned near the VIP coffee station. Manny shrugged. "Stone's orders. Everything on this floor is arranged for her daughter's therapy. Has to do with auditory mapping or something." "Therapy?" Daniel asked, trying not to sound too curious. Manny sipped his coffee. "Yeah, blind since birth. Poor kid. CEO pays top dollar to specialists, but nothing sticks." He looked around, lowered his voice. "Some say the girl's more like a ghost than a child." Daniel didn't answer. He just turned back to his mop, but his mind was turning faster than the water in the bucket. Ghosts don't follow shadows. Daniel began testing something. Small things. He swapped the dark brown trash bin with a bright yellow one. Grace touched it as she passed. He replaced a dull gray, wet floor sign with one that had a reflective strip. She paused, head tilting like she saw it flicker. Then he stood by the window with a silver keychain that caught the afternoon sun just right. Grace's eyes, not her head, not her ears, moved. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. He wasn't a doctor anymore, but instincts like that never really die. Evelyn Stone sat in a leather chair across from the bed where her daughter lay curled under a fleece blanket. She was reading aloud from Charlotte's Web, but her voice was monotone, her eyes on her phone screen instead of the page. Her words came out like code snippets void of rhythm or warmth. And Wilbur never forgot Charlotte. He loved her children dearly, every one of her 514 offspring. Grace didn't flinch, didn't blink. Evelyn stopped reading. She looked at the girl for a long time. Her face was calm, too calm, like water that had never been stirred. "I wish you could tell me," Evelyn whispered. "I wish I knew what's inside your world." She put the book down, stood and walked away, heels clicking like a metronome. Behind her, Grace's hand moved, just slightly, a curl of fingers tightening around the giraffe's leg. Evelyn didn't see it, but Daniel, standing down the hall behind a partially open cleaning closet door, did. Daniel stood by the service lift adjusting a ventilation panel just across from the glass room. He wasn't scheduled to be there, but sometimes janitors became invisible. Inside the room, Grace was sitting cross-legged as usual. But this time, Daniel took a risk. He removed a roll of reflective foil from his cart used for emergency leak checks and unspooled just a small square. He crumpled it softly, then unfolded it, creating a web of jagged reflections. He crouched in the hallway just far enough that Grace wouldn't hear and let the foil dangle where light hit it. Grace didn't move. Then a cloud shifted. Sunlight spilled in. The foil flashed, and Grace blinked. Not once, but twice. Then she squinted, tiny, deliberate, and undeniable. Daniel's heart thudded. No blind child squints at sunlight. Daniel sat alone, a spiral notebook open in front of him. Pages filled with timestamps, reactions notes. Tuesday, 3:12 p.m., light streak on floor. Grace shifts head. Wednesday, reflective surface. Pause, Plutz, eye twitch. Thursday, yellow bin. She touched only that one. Friday, sunlight foil test. 2 blinks plus squint. He circled one line and underlined it twice. Vision response, not blindness. Suppression. He stared at that word. Suppression. Not absence, not damage. Suppression. What if she wasn't blind? What if something or someone was keeping her from seeing? Daniel passed by for the last round of floor check. Evelyn was out in a board meeting. Grace was alone, humming softly to herself. A sound so faint it could have been the air conditioner. Daniel hesitated, then gently knocked his mop handle against the edge of the cleaning cart. Not loud, just enough to cause a soft clink. Grace stopped humming. Then, without turning her head, she lifted her left hand and waved it lightly in his direction. Daniel's breath hitched. He wasn't moving. The sound wasn't distinct. She felt it. Or she saw it. She didn't speak, but she didn't retreat either. Instead, she whispered. He couldn't hear the word, but he saw the shape of it on her lips. Hello. Daniel stood there for a beat too long, and in that moment something shifted. Not just in Grace, not just in him, but in the air itself, like the room had exhaled for the first time in years. Daniel sat in silence, a worn photo of his late daughter on the table. He lit a candle beside it as he did every Friday night. He opened the notebook. The page was nearly full now. He stared at the last note, Grace saw me. He added another line. Or saw something I wasn't supposed to test. Then he whispered toward the candle as if his daughter could hear, "Help me not mess this up." She's not lost. Not like they think. And far above the city, on the 42nd floor of a tower made of steel and secrets, a little girl in a glass room whispered into the dark yellow, "Again." She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, she meant it. The building was mostly dark by now, except for a few blinking security panels and the occasional cleaning crew rotating shifts on lower levels. Floor 42 had been quiet all weekend. No board meetings, no private therapists, no Evelyn Stone. And that was exactly why Daniel stayed late. He had waited 4 days for this moment, rehearsing every step in his head like a soldier planning a stealth mission. The flashlight in his pocket was small, an LED inspection light used for checking pipe leaks. Nothing harmful, no UV, no strobe, just a soft amber glow with adjustable intensity. But tonight, it wasn't for a leak. It was for the truth. Daniel stood just beyond the doorway, hidden by a curtain of shadow. Through the half-frosted glass, he could see her. Grace. Cross-legged on the rug again, head bowed, holding her giraffe with both arms. A dim light bathed the room in honeyed tones. Someone had left a reading lamp on low. She was murmuring something. Not loud, a broken melody. Maybe a hum. Maybe a memory. Daniel crouched low and clicked the flashlight on. A soft glow, no buzz, no flicker. He aimed it at the far corner of the room away from her. Then, slowly, swept it in a slow arc across the opposite wall. It hit a stack of books, bounced gently off the glass cabinet, then glided along the marble floor. Her head didn't move. His heart sank. Then the beam reached the edge of the rug. Grace blinked. Twice. Then, like a flower drawn to the sun, she turned her head only slightly but unmistakably toward the light. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. No training could explain this away. No muscle memory. No coincidence. That was a visual reaction. Subtle, but real. He turned the flashlight off. Waited, turned it on again. Another blink. Another turn of the head. She was tracking. She was seeing. Daniel waited until her attention wandered again, then slowly stepped inside his movement's soft, deliberate room. In one hand, the flashlight slipped discreetly into the cuff of his sleeve. He didn't speak. He just walked to the side table where she kept her storybooks. He dusted, wiped, kept his profile low. Then, casually, he switched off the overhead light. Now, only the reading lamp and his hidden flashlight remained. He adjusted the beam again, casting a soft yellow hue against the floor tiles. Grace looked at it. Not directly, but her head tilted. Her fingers tapped twice on her stuffed giraffe's paw. Then from the stillness came a sound Daniel would never forget. One word. Soft, barely audible, but clear as morning. Yellow. He froze. She hadn't spoken in years. That's what the files said. That's what the staff whispered. Mute since the age of 4. Locked away in silence and shadow. But she said it. Yellow. Daniel swallowed, stunned. He turned the light away. She blinked again. Turned her face with a slow uncertainty as if reaching for something she couldn't name. And then he heard the door behind him click open. Evelyn Stone's heels struck the marble like gunfire. She was still in her weekend attire, slim black slacks, tailored navy coat, but her presence filled the room like a winter draft. Cold. Controlled. What she demanded, her voice sharper than broken glass. "Are you doing in here?" Daniel stood slowly, instinctively shielding the flashlight behind his back. "Cleaning, ma'am." Her eyes locked on him with practiced precision. "With a flashlight. In a restricted zone. I didn't mean any harm. The overhead light was out." He lied. Evelyn stepped forward, eyes scanning Grace, still seated now, quiet, her face blank once again. Whatever spark had flickered just moments ago had vanished. "She doesn't need stimulation. She needs silence," Evelyn said tightly. "She doesn't see, and she doesn't speak. That's what the doctors have told me for 6 years." Daniel said nothing. Because what could he say? That he just saw her blink, that she said yellow, that everything Evelyn believed might be a lie. He looked at the girl again. She was still, but her fingers were tracing soft circles into the rug. Quiet patterns. The kind you draw when you're trying to remember something. Evelyn crossed her arms. "You're dismissed," Ma'am Daniel began. "I trusted your discretion, Mr. Carter. I do not give second chances when it comes to my daughter." His jaw tightened. "With respect, ma'am. Sometimes it's the people who aren't supposed to see who end up seeing what others miss." Her eyes narrowed. "Get out." He nodded, slowly, and walked toward the door. As he reached for the handle, he paused, not looking back. "I didn't see a blind girl tonight," he said softly. "I saw someone reaching for the light." Then he left. Rain fell in slow, steady sheets, painting the sidewalk in watercolor glimmers. Daniel stood at the corner, soaked to the bone. His badge deactivated, his future uncertain. He pulled out his notebook, shielded it under the flap of his jacket, and jotted the final note on the page. Flashlight test. Successful. Grace blinked twice, tracked movement, whispered yellow, confirmed sight response intact. He looked up toward the 42nd floor. A faint light was still on in the corner room. He whispered under his breath. "I saw her." Evelyn stood by the window, arms crossed, watching her daughter sleep. The girl clutched her giraffe tightly, her breathing soft, steady. One hand lay beside her on the blanket, fingers curled slightly except for the index finger which pointed toward the small bedside lamp still casting its yellow glow. Evelyn stared at it. then slowly walked to the switch. Just before she turned it off, she thought just for a second she saw Grace smile. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the sidewalk still held the chill of water that had nowhere else to go. Daniel sat on the splintered bench beneath the rusted bus shelter, the glow of the flickering streetlight casting long shadows across his hands. In those hands was a thin, dog-eared notebook. The pages trembled not from the breeze but from the weight of something far older than weather. He stared down at the page, his pen hovering over the final entry. Grace, yellow, blinked, turned to light, whispered, saw me. Then, slowly, mechanically, as if detaching himself from his own body, he reached to tear the page out. But the sound of tearing paper never came. Instead, he let his hand fall. Because how do you destroy a truth that no one else is willing to carry? He closed the notebook gently, like folding a memory. Across the street, a neon diner sign buzzed erratically. A late-shift server filled a coffee pot. Somewhere a cab honked at a crossing ghost. And Daniel was alone. Alone, except for the echo of a name he hadn't spoken in years. Maddie. The image came uninvited, his daughter, 5 years old, sitting by the window in that too-white hospital room. Her eyes, soft brown like her mother's, squinting just slightly when the sun spilled through the blinds. Back then, he believed he was saving her. They both did. A promising gene therapy. Fast-tracked, unregulated, 1 in a million. But Maddie had never been a statistic. She'd been a miracle he wasn't allowed to keep. He buried his face in his hands. "Why do you keep putting little girls in my path?" he whispered to the night. "Is this redemption or punishment?" No one answered, only the low hiss of a distant tire on wet asphalt. Evelyn Stone did not knock. She never did. She walked into the janitorial annex like she owned the oxygen heels crisp on the concrete floor. Her tailored black coat was soaked at the edges like she hadn't bothered with an umbrella. Daniel was hunched over his locker, eyes heavy with sleep and grief. "Mr. Carter." He turned slowly, and for the first time since he met her, she looked not polished, not poised, just tired. She held something in her hand, a small red giraffe plush. Worn. Familiar. Grace spoke last night. Daniel blinked. What she said a word. Just one. He didn't dare breathe. She said, Evelyn's voice caught, and for a moment the armor cracked. She said, "Mama." Daniel's heart stalled. She hasn't called me that since she was 2. Evelyn continued barely above a whisper, and she was looking at the light, the night lamp beside her bed. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything that hadn't been said. Evelyn inhaled deeply, eyes bracing against vulnerability. I think you saw something I didn't." "I wasn't trying to overstep," Daniel said quietly. I couldn't ignore what I saw." "You were fired," she said, "but I'm not here to offer your job back." He nodded. "Understood. I'm here to ask you to come back as something else." He frowned, as what she held up the giraffe like a flag of surrender, as an observer. The door clicked open softly. Grace was inside playing with wooden puzzle blocks under the filtered morning light. The room had been rearranged Evelyn's doing. Less sterile, more space. Daniel stood behind a one-way pane of mirrored glass. His badge said custodial consultant, but it was a paper mask over something realer. This wasn't about floors anymore. It was about sight and healing. Evelyn stood beside him, arms crossed, watching Grace. "I spent years building technology to help people see," she murmured. "But I didn't see the one person who needed me most." Daniel didn't answer. He was watching Grace, focused. "She has a condition." Evelyn continued more to herself than to him. Congenital blindness, they said. A complete lack of light perception. But she reacted, Daniel finished. "Yes." Evelyn turned toward him slower this time. Measured, vulnerable. "You were in nursing before, weren't you?" He nodded. "Pediatrics. vision disorders. And why did you stop? He looked away. Then finally he said it. My daughter. Maddie. She had a rare condition. We tried something experimental, and it failed. She didn't survive. A beat. I left medicine the day I buried her. Haven't worn scrubs since. Evelyn's face softened. Grace has had every doctor in the state, specialists, neurologists, but none of them saw what you saw. Daniel let out a breath. Maybe because I wasn't looking for a diagnosis. I was just watching a child. She nodded slowly. Then that's what I want you to do. Watch her. Help me understand what's real. He looked at her surprised. You trust me with that? No, she said, but I trust Grace. And she seems to trust you. Daniel sat at his tiny kitchen table notebook, open again, now not torn. Next to it, a fresh stack of folders Evelyn had handed him. Full access to Grace's records, her routines, her therapy logs, and taped to the corner of the last page was a photo. Grace at 2 years old, smiling, eyes wide open, light flooding in behind her. Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he took out a new pen. At the top of the next blank page he wrote, Observational Log. Grace Stone Day. Subject response to low-lumen ambient light appears consistent with residual cone function. Possible delayed visual development. Further testing required. He underlined one word twice. Hope. May I ask what's in the drops? Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. His eyes didn't leave the small amber bottle in his gloved hand. The label was crisp medical official, but something about it made his gut twist. Evelyn paused, arms folded, standing near the observation window where Grace sat cross-legged arranging color-coded tiles by the window light. Those were prescribed by Dr. Morrow himself, she said, her tone clipped. He developed them for retinal inflammation in pediatric congenital blindness. He's treated over 50 similar cases successfully. Daniel nodded slowly. Right, I've read his papers. She raised an eyebrow. Then, you know he's the best in the field. I also know he's not infallible. She stiffened. What are you implying? Daniel set the bottle down gently on the steel counter as though it might shatter even though it wouldn't. I'm implying, he said carefully, that Grace's visual reactions have become stronger, day by day, especially in the hour before her eye drops. Evelyn scoffed. That's anecdotal. No, Daniel said, meeting her eyes. That's observational. There's a difference. The silence between them crackled like static. Evelyn's jaw worked for a moment, then she turned toward the window watching her daughter. Grace was now holding a translucent tile yellow and rotating it in her hand. The light filtered through and shimmered across her cheek. She used to cry every time I touched her eyes, Evelyn whispered, but the drops were supposed to help. That's what they said. That's what I believed. Daniel followed her gaze, then spoke with a gentleness she wasn't expecting. What if they weren't helping Evelyn? What if they were holding her back? She didn't answer, so Daniel pressed just a little further. Let me test one bottle. Off record. Quiet. No harm to Grace, no accusations. Just data. She turned slowly, her voice brittle. Do you have any idea what would happen if this company was accused of suppressing a child's sight while selling vision-enhancing treatments to the public? He didn't blink. That's not what I'm accusing. I just want the truth. A beat. Then you're playing with fire. He nodded. So is every parent who's ever hoped. Daniel sealed the small padded envelope with care, including a handwritten note and a sterile-gloved sample of Grace's eye drops. He addressed it to Monsieur Rojas, Biochem Lab Technician, Detroit Medical. Underneath, he scrawled, Confidential, Priority, Call before testing. He paused for a moment, then added one line, For Maddie. Then he dropped it into the outgoing courier bin outside the building. While waiting for results, Daniel resumed his silent games with Grace. They didn't involve words, just light. A flashlight tucked behind a plant, a slow beam across the floor. a quick flick across her peripheral vision. Each time, Grace blinked, turned, smiled faintly, and once she reached for it. On Friday afternoon, Daniel sat with a tennis ball in his hand, tapping it gently against the floor in a rhythm. The reflection of light danced across the walls. Grace sat nearby, back straight head, tilted slightly. He tossed the ball lightly so it rolled across the patch of sun. Grace tracked it with uncanny precision. She didn't catch it, but she didn't need to. She saw it. Evelyn watched from behind the tinted glass unmoving. Her hands pressed flat against the wall. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't blink. She couldn't, because her daughter, the one she had spent 5 years mourning in silence, was now seeing in motion. The executive suite was dark, not out of neglect, but intention. Evelyn sat in her leather chair shoes off legs pulled beneath her like she hadn't done since college. The city lights blinked through the massive window behind her New York breathing. On the floor beside her was the giraffe plushie. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes, trying to hold back what had already started. One breath, then another. Then a sob. Not loud, not wild, but honest. Years of keeping her spine straight at board meetings. Years of smiling through fundraisers, of saying my daughter is special with a twist of pain no one could ever touch. Years of letting bedtime stories become soundless rituals spoken to a child who never looked up. Now just one moment of stillness, of letting the grief out. Because maybe, just maybe, hope had returned, and it was terrifying. His phone buzzed. A message from Monsieur Rojas lit up the screen. Danny, we need to talk. It's not just saline and steroid in there. Something's wrong. Daniel stared at the screen, then looked up at the photo of Maddie on his fridge, and then to the sketch Grace had drawn that morning, a yellow circle, a blue dot, and what looked like a tiny hand in the corner. She had titled it in shaky letters, Light. The cafe was small, unremarkable, tucked between a dry cleaner and a closed bookstore, but its windows let in morning light that pooled like gold on every surface. Daniel sat at a corner table, his coat still damp from the drizzle outside, a manila envelope unopened in front of him. Evelyn arrived in all-black pressed coat, dark sunglasses despite the clouds. Her presence made the barista glance twice, but she didn't look like a CEO today. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept. She sat down slowly. You said it couldn't wait. Daniel nodded. He tapped the envelope. This came from Detroit this morning. Lab certified, verified, triple-checked. Evelyn took a breath, then reached for the envelope, but hesitated. How bad? Daniel's voice was low. It's not what's in the drug. It's what it's doing. He slid a printed report across the table pages marked with highlighter and post-it flags. Evelyn scanned the top sheet. Her eyes paused at the word cyclopentalate. She looked up. That's just a dilation agent. It's used in children's exams all the time. Daniel's voice was tight, clinical. Controlled, but barely. Yes, for exams. Single use. Not for daily administration over 5 years. That much, he pointed to the dosage line. Can damage the optic nerve's light reflex, suppress pupil response permanently. Grace's case is textbook pharmacological suppression. She may have never been blind. Evelyn's hands trembled. She set the paper down like it burned her. No, that's not possible. Dr. Morrow personally supervised her care. He was the one who told me, who explained. She trailed off, then snapped her gaze back to Daniel. Are you accusing him of malpractice? I'm saying the drug did something it was never meant to do over time, and your daughter paid the price. Silence bloomed between them. The hum of the espresso machine, the clink of cutlery, none of it reached the table. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice fragile. I was there when she stopped tracking light. I remember the day. She was just 6 months old. I thought she was tired, but she wasn't. Daniel leaned in gently. Do you still have her medical files? Evelyn nodded. All of them. Digital, hard copy, everything. Then we trace it, start to finish, prescription by prescription. Let's see who signed off, when, and why. Stacks of binders, years of medical records, pages of progress notes, consults, printouts of emails from specialists. It was all there. A timeline of hope, then resignation. Daniel sat across from Evelyn at her private desk while she pulled up Grace's digital file. One prescription per quarter, some adjusted dosage, some marked routine maintenance. All from the same provider. She paused, scrolling slowly. Dr. Atticus Morrow, she said aloud, bitterness creeping in. Every single one. Daniel frowned. Have you ever met him in person? Evelyn blinked. Once. At a summit in Boston, he presented on neural regeneration. I remember he mentioned a partnership with Gentrix Pharma. Daniel's expression sharpened. Gentrix. That's not FDA certified for pediatric use. She stopped, her face paled. Our foundation. Stone Innovations, invested in Gentrix's early trial models. I thought, her voice cracked, I thought we were helping fund vision therapy. You might have been, Daniel said softer now. But somewhere along the way, someone crossed a line. Evelyn sat by the window cradling a cold mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her voice was barely audible. I trusted the best. I built an entire company on the belief that technology could heal. But I didn't see my own daughter. Fading. Daniel stood across the room, unsure whether to speak. Then she whispered, Do you think she knows Grace Daniel walked over slowly? Children know more than we think, but they don't always carry blame the way adults do. I should have asked more questions, Evelyn said, eyes glassy. I should have been more than a CEO. I should have been her mother. You are her mother, Daniel said, crouching beside her chair. And now, you get to be the kind who fights for the truth. Evelyn didn't move for a moment. Then, quietly, she asked, Will you help me? Daniel nodded once. Every step. Grace lay curled up in bed, a soft nightlight glowing amber in the corner. Daniel stood in the doorway watching as Evelyn knelt beside the bed. She held no book tonight, no screen, just her hands gently brushing Grace's hair. Mommy's here, she whispered, and you're not alone. Grace stirred, opened her eyes, and smiled faintly. A small, raspy voice answered yellow. Evelyn gasped, covering her mouth. Daniel turned away, tears stinging the corners of his eyes. In that one word spoken like a miracle, the dam inside Evelyn finally broke, not with sorrow, but with hope. I'm terminating all partnerships with Morrow Laboratories effective immediately. Evelyn's voice cut through the boardroom like a scalpel. Around the massive glass table, 12 of the most powerful executives in the biotech sector stiffened. Coffee cups paused mid-air. Tablets were set down. The air stilled. Evelyn began, Milton Crane, CFO and shareholder. Since the company's founding, you can't just unilaterally cancel a contract backed by 10 years of performance and federal grants. She didn't flinch. Watch me. Crane leaned forward, eyes sharp behind tortoiseshell frames. This isn't just about some personal vendetta or media optics. You're talking about cutting ties with our highest-yield research stream, one backed by institutional investors. You want to throw away a decade of work? No, Evelyn replied, ice in her tone. I want to throw away a decade of damage. She tapped a file folder in front of her. In there, you'll find lab results from an independent biochemist confirming the prolonged misuse of cyclopentolate in a product we funded. The dosage Grace was prescribed was not only unethical, it was designed to suppress symptoms, not cure them. Another board member, Lena Wright from legal, looked uneasy. Are you implying deliberate negligence? That's a dangerous statement without— I'm not implying, Evelyn interrupted. I'm stating, and if we don't stop now, the lawsuits won't be an if, they'll be a when. A beat of silence. Then Crane smirked. You sure this isn't about your daughter? That was the moment something shifted in Evelyn's posture. She stood taller, not in defense, but in defiance. Yes, she said, it's about my daughter, and every child like her whose parents trusted us to do better. Daniel stood beside the janitor, cart mop in hand, pretending to wipe a scuff that had been gone for days. The door wasn't fully closed. He hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but something about the tone inside made him pause. Crane's voice rose. "You know the board won't back this. She's unraveling. One child's condition, however tragic, can't dictate the direction of a billion-dollar company. We need to contain this. If she won't, someone else will." Another voice, quieter, crueler. "She's vulnerable, widowed, exhausted. If she steps down quietly, we avoid a scandal. There are ways to clean up this mess." Daniel's grip tightened on the mop handle. His gut twisted. Clean up this mess. He knew corporate politics were brutal, but this wasn't damage control, it was erasure. Evelyn sat alone now, shoulders rigid. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. Daniel entered quietly. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, not looking up. "I know," he replied, "but I heard enough to know you shouldn't be alone right now." She turned to face him. There were no tears, just exhaustion, a battlefield silence after the last shot. "They think I'm emotional, unstable, that I've lost objectivity." Daniel pulled the blinds slightly. Morning light poured in. Across the room, Grace's drawing sat on the coffee table. A small, crumpled sheet, one yellow circle, wobbly, bright, unmistakably sunlight. "Objectivity didn't save her vision," Daniel said gently. "You trusted them. You funded them. And they failed her. But you have a chance to undo it." She swallowed hard. "They'll push me out." "Let them," Daniel said. "But make it cost them." Evelyn blinked. "You think I should go public?" He met her eyes. "If you don't, they will rewrite the story before the ink dries. And this time, it won't just be your daughter they silence." Grace sat on the floor, a white sheet of paper in front of her, crayons strewn about like candy. Daniel entered with a quiet knock. "Morning sunshine," he said softly. Grace didn't respond with words. Instead, she picked up a crayon yellow and slowly drew another arc. Then another. A jagged, glowing halo took shape. Daniel crouched beside her, heart catching in his throat. "Can you tell me what that is?" Grace. She didn't speak, but she pointed to the window. The sun had just broken through the clouds, light spilling onto the floor like melted gold. Daniel whispered almost to himself, "She sees it." Evelyn stood at the doorway now, unnoticed. Her voice trembled. She never liked yellow. Not until this week. Daniel turned. She never saw it before this week. Evelyn stepped in slowly, kneeling beside them. "Grace," she asked gently, "what color is Mommy's dress?" Grace looked up straight into her mother's eyes. There was a pause, then a soft, whispery answer. "Blue." Evelyn burst into tears, folding her daughter into her arms, her whole body shaking. No cameras, no applause, just the quiet miracle of a child rediscovering the world and a mother rediscovering faith. The day's headlines hadn't yet broken. The press hadn't smelled blood. But Daniel stood in front of his small corkboard wall, pinning new notes above a growing file. Morrow, FDA cyclopentalate. Long-term impact, Gen Tricks. Investor ties Stone Foundation. Early grants. He stepped back, connected the dots with red thread, a network of silence, protected by money. But Evelyn had chosen to break it, and now they weren't alone. He took one last look at Grace's latest drawing tacked right above the files, a yellow circle, crayon-smeared, shining like a new sun. The apartment smelled of old paper chamomile tea and the kind of silence that had lasted too long. Daniel knocked once. The door creaked open, an inch held back by a brass chain. A cautious eye peered through the gap. "Daniel Carter," he said gently. "You called me Tuesday. We brought no press." A pause. Then the chain slid away. The woman behind the door was in her late 50s with short graying curls and tired but watchful eyes. Her name was Marilyn Chase, a former pediatric nurse at a private research clinic affiliated with Morrow Labs. She stepped back to let them in. I never thought I'd see anyone come back for the truth. The apartment was modest, its shelves stacked with nursing textbooks and folders marked "Do Not Destroy." Daniel and Evelyn sat on an old couch across from Marilyn's recliner. Marilyn poured tea, her hands steady despite the gravity of what she was about to do. Evelyn broke the silence. "You worked with Morrow, didn't you?" Marilyn's mouth twitched. More like, "I watched him work, until I couldn't stomach it anymore." She opened a thin cabinet by the window and retrieved a folder wrapped in a scarf. She laid it on the coffee table as if it might burn her fingertips. Daniel leaned forward, but Marilyn lifted a hand. "Before you read this, understand something. These records aren't just numbers. They're children." Evelyn's throat tightened. Marilyn unfolded the scarf. Inside were medical charts, dosage schedules, and something else, a typed internal memo dated 2016 marked "Confidential for clinical team only." In continued testing of optic suppression via controlled microdosing, visual stimulus dampening in infants may reveal insights into regenerative nerve pathways post-withdrawal. Long-term implications to be monitored case by case. Do not disclose to parents. Phase 4 begins June. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth. He suppressed vision. Marilyn nodded grimly. Grace wasn't blind. She was blinded. Daniel sat back, stunned. So, all these years, Grace was part of some experiment. Marilyn's voice cracked. They masked it in white coats and grants, said they were monitoring anomalies in visual development. But we were crippling children to see if they'd heal on command. Evelyn stared at the file. "I funded this." "No," Daniel said firmly. "You funded what they told you it was. There's a difference." But Evelyn's eyes brimmed with something deeper than guilt-grief. "My husband believed in Morrow," she whispered. "He believed this technology could change lives. I stood beside him when we signed that first check. We cut the ribbon on the first clinic together." She pressed her fingers to her forehead. "If this comes out, everything we built his name, his legacy gone." Marilyn sat back with a sigh. "And if it doesn't come out, children like Grace keep getting silenced." Daniel leaned forward. "What happened to the others?" Marilyn's jaw tightened. Some improved. Some didn't. Some vanished from follow-up entirely. There was a beat of silence that no one dared fill. A sudden buzz interrupted the stillness. Evelyn glanced at her phone. One message. From an unknown number. "If you speak to the press, Stone Innovations burns, and so does your husband's reputation." Daniel caught the flicker in her eyes. "What is it?" Evelyn turned the screen toward them. Daniel swore under his breath. "They're watching you." "They always have," Marilyn said. "They watched me, too. That's why I've never shared this with anyone. But now, with you two here, I think it's time." She stood and retrieved a flash drive from inside a hollowed-out medical dictionary. "This contains everything I've collected. Records, memos, audio files. I don't want to be the one to release it, but I'll give it to someone who still believes in what's right." Evelyn stared at the drive as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Will you take it?" Marilyn asked. Evelyn didn't move. The city lights flickered as they drove in silence. Evelyn finally spoke. "Do you know what it's like to build your whole life on one belief, one man's dream, and then realize it might have all been a lie?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He waited until they stopped at a red light. Then he said, "Yes." She turned to him, surprised. "My wife believed in a cure, too. For another disease. We trusted a new therapy trial. We were desperate, and we lost her anyway. The science was flawed, rushed. The trial was profitable." He looked at her eyes, steady. "So, yeah, I know what it's like to trust the system only to watch it bury the people you love. Evelyn looked down at the flash drive in her lap. They'll tear me apart, she whispered. Daniel replied softly, then let them. But make sure they choke on the truth. Evelyn sat alone now. The room was dim lit only by the soft screen glow. The flash drive rested on her desk. Behind her on a shelf sat a photo of her late husband, smiling, proud, holding Grace as a baby. Behind him, the Stone Innovations groundbreaking banner. She picked up the photo, studied it, then whispered, "If you were here, would you still believe in them?" Silence answered. She reached for the flash drive, slid it into the port, and began to read. Grace was drawing again. This time, not a son, but two people. A tall man with a mop and warm eyes, and a woman with a briefcase and tear tracks on her face. In the corner, she scribbled in shaky letters, Mom, Bruce, Daniel, Poos, me. The first golden light of dawn spilled across the nursery floor, casting long warm beams through the sheer curtains. Inside, the silence broke not with an alarm clock or a voice calling her name, but with the gentle patter of tiny feet on hardwood. Grace. She pushed the blanket aside, hair tousled from sleep bare feet, padding toward the light like something ancient in her remembered it. She stopped in front of the window. Sunlight touched her cheeks. Her eyes fluttered. And then, with the gentlest breath of wonder, she whispered, "It's yellow again." Not just sound, not just syllables. Words, chosen, clear, free. In the hallway, Evelyn froze. The tea in her hand trembled, sloshing over the rim of the cup. She turned slowly, just as Daniel stepped beside her face, slack with awe. You heard that she asked barely above a breath. Daniel didn't speak. He walked slowly into Grace's room. The little girl stood still, bathed in light. Her hand stretched out not to touch the glass, but to follow the beam across the floor. Her tiny voice came again. "It's not just yellow. It's warm." Evelyn covered her mouth, tears already beginning to fall. Daniel knelt beside Grace and gently asked, "Sweetheart, can you tell me what else you see?" Grace looked up at him. Her eyes, once clouded and blank, now shimmered with a new clarity. She blinked at him slowly, deliberately. "There's you," she said, pointing toward him, "and Mama." Evelyn choked back a sob. "You can see us." Grace nodded. "Not like before. It's fuzzy, but I see colors now, and shapes." She turned back toward the window. "And that," she whispered, "that's the sun. Daddy used to say the sun was yellow." Evelyn couldn't hold it anymore. She dropped to her knees, pulled Grace into her arms, and wept, not like a CEO, not like a woman of steel, but like a mother who had waited too long for this miracle. Daniel stood nearby, his eyes moist, but his hands steady. "She's not just seeing light," he said softly. "She's seeing again." Grace sat with her crayon's tongue poking from the side of her mouth as she focused. The sun poured in across the table. Daniel brewed coffee while Evelyn silently stared at the paper in Grace's hands. She had drawn a sun again. A yellow circle. Not scribbled like before, but formed round, radiant. And this time 2 stick figures stood underneath it. One taller one, smaller, holding hands. Grace pointed to the taller one. "That's Mr. Janitor," she said proudly, "and that's me." Evelyn crouched beside her, eyes still red. "And who's that?" she asked, pointing to a third figure Grace had just added, a woman with long hair standing on the other side of the sun, also holding hands. Grace looked up, smiling. "That's you, Mama. You were always there. I just didn't know how to draw you yet." Stacks of legal folders lined her desk. Her assistant had left 3 voicemails already about the board meeting on Monday. The media team wanted statements ready. Investors wanted silence. She ignored them all. On her desk sat the flash drive Marilyn had given her next to the photo of her husband holding infant Grace. Evelyn took a deep breath and looked up at Daniel, who stood quietly near the bookshelf. I used to think power meant control, she said, commanding the room, steering the ship, making sure no one saw you fall apart. She looked out the window at her garden where Grace was now running in small circles in the sunlight, arms outstretched like a bird. But that's not power. Not real power. What is, Daniel asked, voice low. Letting the truth breathe, she replied, even when it tears down everything you built. Daniel walked over, stood beside her. You're about to lose a lot, he said gently. Stock value, board trust, legacy. Evelyn shook her head. No, I'm about to rebuild it. Email to entire company. Subject. A truth we must all see to all employees of Stone Innovations. Today, I write to you not as your CEO, but as a mother, a woman who believed in science more than silence, in progress more than pause, and in doing so, I missed what mattered most. An internal review has revealed that a line of eye treatments co-developed in one of our partnered clinics may have caused unintended harm, including to my own daughter. While the intent was innovation, the outcome was silence, and that ends now. I am personally funding an independent investigation into all projects involving pediatric sensory treatments. I will cooperate fully with federal authorities. This is not the end of Stone Innovations. This is its rebirth. Evelyn, Stone Chief Executive Officer. Stone Innovations CEO issues. Shocking public confession, FDA to investigate. Morrow, clinical trials. Whistleblower claims backed by internal files. Grace sat in the garden holding Daniel's hand while watching the orange glow of the setting sun. Evelyn joined them, crouching beside her daughter. Can you still see it? She asked. Grace nodded. It's not as bright now, but it's still there. So are we, Daniel said, giving her hand a squeeze. Evelyn looked at him. You know, when you first showed up, I thought you were a janitor who didn't know his place. Daniel chuckled. And you were a CEO who forgot hers. They both smiled. Then Evelyn added, voice soft, but it turns out we both just needed to look harder. Grace leaned her head on Evelyn's shoulder and yawned. I want to draw more tomorrow, she said sleepily. The sky, the birds, and maybe a big heart. Evelyn kissed her forehead. Then draw it all, my love. Draw the whole world. The air was thick with camera clicks. Dozens of journalists filled the grand briefing room, lenses trained on a single podium under the emblem of Stone Innovations, now draped not in silver and glass but softened by a hand-painted backdrop. A child's drawing. 3 figures under a golden sun. One tall one, shorter one, tiny. Hands clasped. The only color more striking than the yellow sun was the red heart cradled in the child's hand. It was Grace's. And it said everything Evelyn couldn't. Evelyn stood behind the microphone, hands gripping the edges of the podium. Her black suit was sharp. Her voice steady but human. I am not here to defend myself, she began. I am here to tell the truth. The room fell into a hush. I believed in a system that rewarded speed. That praised visionaries for being first, even if the path was paved in silence. I believed the cost of innovation was risk and that those risks were statistical. She paused, but it was never a number. It was my daughter. Cameras flashed. My daughter Grace was prescribed a drug at birth, a drug meant to support early neural development. It was developed in part through a clinic we once funded under a physician named Atticus Morrow. At that name, murmurs spread through the crowd. Evelyn nodded to her legal counsel, who handed a thick dossier to the FDA official beside her. These are internal communications trial logs and unapproved compound usage reports tied to Dr. Morrow's work. We are releasing them to the public and to federal investigators in full. She drew a breath. My daughter is now beginning to regain her sight. Because of one man, someone no one in this room would have hired. Someone I once fired. The crowd leaned forward. He was a janitor, a single father. His name is Daniel Carter. Evelyn's voice softened. I will not show you his face. He asked for privacy, but I will show you his legacy." She stepped aside and gestured toward the drawing. This is what courage looks like, drawn by a child who's seeing the world again because someone dared to look closer. Daniel sat on a bench away from the noise. No cameras, no lights. Just him, a thermos of coffee, and a small folded origami sun Grace had given him that morning. He didn't watch the press conference. He didn't need to. His phone buzzed once an image. It was Grace's drawing, now projected behind Evelyn as she spoke. He smiled. She kept the heart, he whispered. "Ms. Ixiu Stone, some call this a PR move to salvage your company's reputation. How do you respond?" Evelyn looked directly at the reporter. "If I wanted to salvage a company, I would have stayed quiet. Silence is profitable." But my daughter's voice, her first real words, were worth more than any stock price. A beat passed, and one more thing she added. "Stone Innovations will no longer fund trials that bypass pediatric ethical boards no matter the payout. That is not a slogan. It's a legal mandate." Another reporter stood. "What happens to Dr. Morrow?" Before Evelyn could answer, an aide stepped onto the stage and whispered in her ear. She turned back to the podium, calm but resolute. "Dr. Atticus Morrow has been taken into custody in New Mexico. The charges include multiple counts of unethical human testing and obstruction of federal regulation." Gasps filled the room. "The Department of Justice and the FDA will conduct a full criminal investigation. I will cooperate every step of the way." Breaking, former pediatric specialist arrested. Drug trials linked to childhood vision loss. Stone Innovations CEO speaks out. My daughter was one of them. Grace Stone's recovery sparks medical reforms across state boards. Grace curled under the covers, a flashlight in one hand and a book in the other. Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed, eyes softer than they had been in years. "Do you want me to read tonight?" she asked. Grace shook her head. "I can try," she whispered, and slowly, carefully, she began to sound out the words. Daniel watched from the doorway, arms crossed loosely, heart wide open. "She's learning fast," he said. "She has a good teacher," Evelyn replied. "She has two. She gave up everything to tell the truth," said one anchor. "Her investors may never forgive her. But her daughter will," another replied. "And that's the only vote that matters." A new wing was opened that week. Not for research, for rehabilitation. Children, once labeled incurable, now sat with colored pencils in their hands, sketching sons' hearts, and one little girl even drew a man with a mop and a smile. Above the doorway, etched in soft silver. Sometimes the brightest light comes from the quietest room. Daniel sat by the window, sketchbook in hand. It wasn't much. Just a few boxes, a bookshelf, a photo of his daughter gone, but never far. He looked at the latest page. Not numbers, not notes. Just Grace's drawing taped to the wall. 3 figures, under one sun, and in the center, a small red heart. The hall buzzed with soft chatter laughter and the rustle of paper. Light streamed in from tall windows, casting golden streaks across white walls adorned with artwork, scribbled suns, wobbly trees, handprints, and hopes. Near the far end, surrounded by a small crowd of parents, donors, and curious strangers, hung a display titled "Seeing with My Heart" by Grace Stone. Easels held 5 framed drawings. The first, a smudged yellow circle labeled Sun. The second, 2 small figures beside a towering shape with curly hair, me and Mom. The third, a shadow with a glowing flashlight in one hand, he helped me see. The fourth, 3 hands holding a red heart. And the last centerpiece of the entire gallery was signed in crayon carefully, Mom, me, and Mr. Janitor. It was a swirl of bold colors, violets, oranges, soft sky blues. The girl in the drawing smiled with her eyes wide open. The woman beside her knelt, arms outstretched. And the janitor. He stood tall, not with a mop, but with a book in one hand and a paper sun in the other. The crowd didn't clap. They paused. They looked at one another. Then they simply smiled. Evelyn watched from the side of the stage, a hand resting lightly on her chest. A coordinator tapped her shoulder. "You're up." She took a breath, straightened her jacket, and walked to the microphone. 6 months ago, she began My daughter couldn't see her own drawings, couldn't tell me the color of the sun, or even that she wanted to draw. She looked down at Grace, who was sitting in the front row, legs swinging, face bright. I was told she would never see, and I believed that. I built a life around that belief, a company, a future, and I told myself it was enough to love her in the dark. She paused. But sometimes light doesn't come from our own eyes. Sometimes it comes from the person who dares to believe that we were never blind to begin with. The audience listened utterly still. Evelyn continued, voice softer now. To every child out there, whether your eyes work the way books say they should or not, know this: you are seen. You matter. You are not broken. She looked back at Grace, who was now waving at someone behind the curtain. And to the janitors of the world, Evelyn added, smiling faintly, who sweep more than floors, they sweep away fear, doubt, and silence. Thank you. Daniel stood near the exit, hands in his pockets, wearing a blue button-up he'd ironed twice that morning. He hadn't planned to come. He didn't like attention, or suits, or crowds. But when Grace's invitation came, handwritten in crayon and sealed with a sticker that read, "You helped me see yellow again," he couldn't say no. He watched as Evelyn stepped down from the stage. She moved through the crowd with calm grace, accepting congratulations, handshakes, a few hesitant hugs, but her eyes scanned beyond them. They found him. She walked slowly, deliberately, until the crowd thinned and it was just the two of them again, like that night on the rooftop or the hallway outside Grace's room. "I didn't see you," she said gently. "I didn't want to be seen," Daniel replied. "You never did." Evelyn looked down. "You didn't just help Grace. You helped me." There was a long pause. Daniel swallowed. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he said. "I just couldn't walk away from what I saw." "No," she said. "You walked toward it, even when it cost you your job, your peace, even when no one listened." Their eyes met. "You believed in her," she whispered. "I believed she deserved the truth." "So did you," Evelyn said. And then Grace came bounding over, ponytail bouncing, fingers sticky from frosting. "Hey," she beamed. "Did you see it? I made us with colors. Not just yellow this time." She reached out small fingers, wrapping around Evelyn's left hand, Daniel's right. "You guys are holding hands," she observed with a giggle. "That's weird." Daniel laughed. Evelyn didn't let go. The sun dipped low. Orange hues splashed across the glass windows like paint spilled by the sky itself. Inside, the lights dimmed for the evening concert. But in that one moment, as they stood just outside the main doors, the sunlight passed cleanly through the arched window behind them, washing over the trio standing together. Daniel, Evelyn, Grace. 3 people who once lived on different floors in different lives, orbiting pain, silence, and doubt. Now, one child's voice, one man's quiet courage, and one woman's second chance had changed all of it. And so the janitor who once asked for a job, not money, the CEO who had forgotten how to feel, and the little girl who was told she'd never see, walked home under the same sun. Not just yellow, not just light, but whole. Light through glass, soft, steady, real. And maybe that's what second chances really are. Not perfect, not planned, but quiet moments where someone chooses to believe, when no one else would. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city, your state, or your country in the comments below. And tell me this: have you ever seen someone truly seen them when the rest of the world looked away? Or maybe someone once saw you. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories that heal, that challenge, that shine light where it's needed most, Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell so you never miss the next chapter. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for spending your time here with us. You could have watched anything, but you chose this, and maybe that means you're part of the light too. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never stop seeing the good.